Wife calls cops on her husband and regrets it big time. What happens when a moment of fear and anger pushes a woman to make the ultimate decision, calling the cops on her husband? Irene, feeling lost in her marriage, makes a rash choice that spirals out of control, leading to a night that will change everything. As her husband, Jerry, is arrested and their lives unravel, Irene is left with the heavy weight of regret. Can she fix what she's broken, or has she destroyed her marriage forever? Watch as secrets unfold, emotions clash, and the fight for forgiveness becomes a battle of trust. Will they survive this mistake, or is it too late to undo the damage? Watch the full video to discover. If this is your first time here on our channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our amazing stories. Now let's jump into the full story. Irene had spent the last few months feeling increasingly isolated in her marriage. Jerry, her husband of 12 years, had changed. Once the man she could talk to about anything, he now barely spoke to her. His long hours at work, late nights, and growing distance made her feel invisible. She didn't want to believe he was cheating, but the doubts were hard to ignore. One evening, after another argument where Jerry barely acknowledged her, Irene snapped. She stormed out of the house and drove around aimlessly, her frustration growing. When she returned home, Jerry was still there, reading his emails, not a word exchanged. Something inside Irene broke. "Enough is enough," she muttered, picking up her phone and dialing 911. It wasn't the first time they'd fought, but tonight felt different. She needed help, she couldn't take the silence anymore. "Hello, emergency services. What's the nature of your emergency? I think my husband is hiding something. He's acting strange and I don't know what to do anymore." Irene's voice trembled as she spoke. The decision felt impulsive, but it seemed like the only option in her mind. The officer on the other end of the line advised her to stay calm and that they would send someone over. Irene didn't think much of it, she was too angry, too hurt to care about the consequences. It didn't take long before the police arrived. Jerry was in the living room, his face unreadable when he saw the officers. The situation escalated quickly when the police started questioning both of them. Irene's accusations of his suspicious behavior led to Jerry being arrested for disorderly conduct when he raised his voice in frustration, something he'd never done in front of the police before. Irene stood frozen as the officers handcuffed Jerry. Her heart sank. What had she done? Was this really the solution to their problems? "I didn't do anything, Irene," Jerry shouted as the officers led him out of the house. His words rang in her ears, but they felt like an accusation, not a plea. The harsh reality of her decision hit her like a ton of bricks. She had called the cops on the man she loved. And now everything was unraveling. Jerry spent the night in jail. Irene, on the other hand, sat alone in their empty house, her mind racing. Her phone had been buzzing with texts from her friends and family, asking if she was okay. No one knew what had happened yet. It felt like the world was closing in on her. She replayed the events in her mind. Her decision had been so impulsive, driven by fear and anger. But was this really what she wanted? Was Jerry really the man she thought he was, or had she simply misunderstood everything? When Jerry was released the next morning, he didn't come home. Irene spent the day pacing, unsure of what to do next. She hadn't heard from him and she felt like she was losing him. She could only imagine the anger and humiliation he must be feeling. Irene called Jerry several times, but he didn't answer. She left messages, apologizing, begging for him to come home. But when he finally did, his eyes were cold. He barely spoke to her, and when he did, his words were laced with bitterness. "How could you, Irene?" Jerry's voice was low and etched with hurt. "You called the cops on me. You ruined everything." Irene couldn't hold back her tears. "I didn't know what else to do. I was scared and confused. I thought you were hiding something from me. I thought I was losing you." Jerry turned away, shaking his head. "You didn't trust me, Irene. You let your fears control you, and now look at us. I can't go back to that. I can't go back to you." Days passed, and the silence between them became unbearable. Irene tried to explain, but Jerry wouldn't listen. He was distant, withdrawn. The more she tried to make it right, the further he pulled away. Irene knew she had to do something, but what? One night, after yet another failed attempt to talk, Irene went for a walk. Her mind was racing. She realized that in her desire to protect herself from the unknown, she had hurt the person she loved most. She had crossed a line that could never be erased. Irene reached out to a therapist in desperation, hoping to understand her actions and how to fix things. The therapist, a calm woman named Carol, helped her process the emotions that had led to the fateful decision to call the police. "You were afraid, Irene," Carol said gently. "But you acted out of fear and suspicion, not out of love. The truth is, we sometimes create problems where none exist because we're afraid of being hurt." Irene nodded, tears streaming down her face. "But how do I fix this? How do I make things right with Jerry?" "Start by being honest with yourself," Carol advised. "And then be honest with him. Apologies take time and they have to come from a place of true understanding." Irene spent the following days reflecting on her actions. She knew she had to apologize not just for calling the cops, but for not trusting Jerry. One afternoon she invited him to sit down and talk. "Jerry, I am so sorry," Irene began, her voice trembling. "I was scared and I let my emotions control me. I should have trusted you. I should have never called the police. I know I hurt you and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Jerry looked at her, his expression unreadable. There was a long pause before he spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Irene," he said quietly. "But I'm willing to listen. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, but I'm willing to try." Irene tried to do everything right. She attended therapy, worked on herself, and gave Jerry space to heal. But forgiveness wasn't easy. Jerry remained distant, still processing the betrayal he felt. "I'm trying, Jerry," Irene would say, but he would just nod as if he were hearing her but not really listening. The weeks passed in a haze of uncertainty. Jerry's behavior remained cold and Irene felt like she was losing him bit by bit. Every day was a struggle to prove that she had changed, but the damage done was difficult to undo. One evening after a long day of work, Jerry came home and sat down beside Irene on the couch. She looked at him, hopeful yet apprehensive. "I've been thinking a lot, Irene," he said slowly. "About what happened, about us." Irene held her breath, waiting. "I'm not saying everything is fixed, but I want to try," Jerry continued. "I'm willing to rebuild if you are. But it has to be real. No more secrets. No more calling the cops when things get hard. Can you promise me that?" Irene felt a rush of relief wash over her. "I promise. I'll work every day to make things right." It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But Jerry and Irene began the long process of healing. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They learned to communicate, to trust, and to never let fear dictate their decisions again. In the end, Irene learned that sometimes the cost of a rash decision is more than you can afford. But with patience, honesty, and love, it's possible to rebuild what's been broken, if both people are willing to try.